Brand new poll out, and guess who is in the lead? Whose lead is growing? You know who? Donald Trump. He's way ahead now, climbing. Ron DeSantis facing a few more challenges. We're going to get into the numbers. Would he actually win, given what the so-called elites keep trying to do? News today that it turns out it was the CIA or a bunch of ex-CIA people, along with Antony Blinken, our current Secretary of State, that were behind the shutdown of the story about the Hunter Biden laptop. Whoa! So just to be clear, apparently the dossier that turned out to be fake, they wanted us to believe was real. Well, the Hunter Biden laptop story, which turned out to be real, they were trying to convince everybody was fake.
Lies and smears and slander.
One twisted world in which we now live. Speaking of which, apparently the FBI is being discouraged from revealing the Nashville Shooters Manifesto. This was the woman who was transgender, who committed just this heinous, awful crime. Why, though, would we be suppressing that? We're going to get into that. Senator Johnson had something to say on that, so I'm going to share that with you. Meanwhile, they got their woke agenda. That's been very, very clear, but it doesn't always work. Doesn't always work. Case in point, Bud Light, great example. You're not going to believe the beer that's benefiting from the Bud Light disaster. I'm all over it as we look at the stock prices here.
1,800 billion. Splendid.
Do you know this guy? If you don't know this guy, you need to know this guy. This is Mr. Beast. We're going to talk about him because he's got a situation that I told you about the other day where one of his main cast members, used to look like this and now looks like this. Doesn't really fit with the storyline of the show. It's like a $500 million enterprise that Mr. Beast, that's his name, Mr. Beast, Jimmy Donaldson runs. So he's speaking out on it. We're going to get to his comments today. Meanwhile, this woke agenda stuff is like taking over everything. You got the Duke University economics professor who thinks all you need to do to solve racial inequality in America is just give everyone $350,000 that may have been a descendant from a slave.
The first condition is that reparations should be paid to Black Americans whose ancestors were enslaved in the United States.
Oh, I guess that's one way. It's not going to help much, obviously. I think it would cause a whole host of other problems. The other way is what the Joe Biden administration has already put forward, so that those with good credit scores are going to have to pay additional fees. The whole idea is you subsidize people with bad credit scores. And if you are someone who's been fortunate enough to be able to save enough money, maybe 15 or 20% for a down payment on a house, they're going to penalize you even more.
Why?
What kind of crazy world are we really living in? I'm telling you, Venezuela, here we come. It didn't take long to turn that economy into something else entirely. Welcome to the program, everyone. I am Trish Regan. Good to have you here. Portions of the show are brought to you, as always, by LegacyPMInvestments.com. Go to LegacyPMInvestments.com to buy gold or silver, or sell gold or silver. You can do it all right there on that platform. You can get some advice from them if you're looking to maybe have a gold IRA or have the stuff delivered right to your house.
I'd make that deal. I don't blame you. Damn good deal.
Just call them at 1-866-589-0560. Our top story today, Donald Trump way ahead in this poll. Just taken by the Wall Street Journal. It's showing that he's got a pretty solid lead over Ron DeSantis, 51% to 38% among most likely Republican primary voters. This is a hypothetical head-to-head matchup. Don't forget, you get Nikki Haley in there. You've got Mike Pence. He's not doing so well. And Ron DeSantis, of course, hasn't even announced that he's running. Things are looking a little tougher, though. And it may be because, sunny Florida isn't so sunny right now, in part because of this whole Mickey saga. Mickey's a little bit stronger than you might have thought. I mean, you know the whole drill. Disney, Ron DeSantis, they're in this kind of boxing match here because Ron DeSantis and Disney don't see eye to eye on the quote unquote don't say gay policy, which basically means that you shouldn't be talking about sexuality really at all to little kids. Right? Like it doesn't even, like kind of, save it for when they're older. You don't even need to go there. And that's the whole idea behind it. Disney didn't like it. And so they've been fighting back and, they spend a lot of money lobbying in the state of Florida. So Ron DeSantis said, 2 of us can play that game. And, right now it seems that, it's Mickey 1, DeSantis 0. And I say this only because you got a lot of Republicans now, a lot of conservatives coming out and saying this is not the way to go. In other words, we're not Venezuela. We are not a communist country. We are not a dictatorship.
What the What does that even mean?
Therefore, Disney can do what Disney wants to do, and you have to protect and understand certain contracts that are in place because we are, after all, a capitalist country. And so you've got many, many conservatives. Big op-ed in the Wall Street Journal by Kimberly Strassel saying that this is really just not kind of the way to go. And believe it or not, Donald Trump weighing in on it too and taking the side of, well, shall we say the establishment? Kind of a rare thing for Donald Trump. He thinks that Florida might find itself without a Disney in the future. I don't know about that, but I would say that it has become a headache, increasingly so for Ron DeSantis. But the other thing going on, and you can't forget this, Americans don't like when you put someone in a corner. Don't forget, that's exactly what the Democrats just did. You had the DA, Bragg, coming out, digging up these old charges, getting very creative with these charges. And consequently, you had the former president of the United States being arrested. I mean, wild, wild stuff. The only countries you can think of that do that happen to be like these banana republics or places like Venezuela. I don't mean to keep picking on Venezuela, but it's a good example right now.
Why are you including me in this?
I'm going to talk about it a little bit more later. So he's up against it. He's got the base rallying around him like you wouldn't believe. And you get a lot of people in the middle saying this is kind of an overreach by government right now. And this overreach has us concerned, as it should. This overreach is nonstop. Just think about what has happened in the last few years. I want to just start with the Hunter Biden laptop that you couldn't talk about. It was like the one thing that could not be said. Don't forget what happened in the New York Post. Their Twitter account got shut down because they reported on the Hunter Biden laptop. And then you had this big letter with all the former CIA guys, all the deep state professionals saying this was Russian disinformation, that the Hunter Biden laptop was all made up.
Do you believe me yet?
And they had the cover that, oh, it's that crazy Rudy Giuliani that's bringing this thing forward. This is all Russian disinformation. So you better shut it down. You better shut it down fast. And that's exactly what all the social media companies did. Look, I ran into it right on Facebook. I personally suppressed for one whole year. And they came around and told me that they were suppressing me because we had a story about the laptop. And that was quote unquote fake news and a whole host of other things that they labeled it. So that landed me in jail. I'd never been in jail before like that for a whole year.
It's over. We are screwed.
This is what they did. So that story, which turns out to be true, was completely shut down while simultaneously the same cast of characters, Morell, Brennan, and Blinken, I got to get to him in a minute, the same cast of characters were the ones that were saying that the Russian dossier was true. They wanted us to believe the Russians had planted Donald Trump there because they had the goods on him.
The Russians?
How mixed up is this? And it gets even scarier. It gets even scarier because when you find out who was behind this letter that was the game changer, really, because you couldn't tell the truth during the whole election season, the game changer really came from none other than Antony Blinken. Antony Blinken, our current Secretary of State, ladies and gentlemen, that did a horrendous job getting us out of Afghanistan, that continues to do a horrendous job in terms of negotiating the relationship with Taiwan and China. And let's be honest, clearly failed in any kind of diplomatic effort to prevent war between Ukraine and Russia. Hundreds of thousands of lives being lost when maybe if you had a more talented Secretary of State, you could have avoided that situation. The guy is clearly, and now that I know that he was behind this letter, he is clearly no good, as John McCain once told us years ago when the guy was up for Deputy Secretary of State in the Obama administration. Listen to this.
Discuss my opposition to the pending vote concerning Mr. Tony Blinken, who is not only unqualified, but in fact, in my view, one of the worst selections of a very bad lot that this president has chosen.
I'll tell you, he was right on that. Think about those words and what McCain had to say. Meanwhile, more sort of efforts to suppress the truth are going on with this whole Nashville shooter situation, a really tragic story. I just hate talking about this, but you recall there was the transgender young woman who went into that Christian school, and it's really horrible to think about. I can't imagine what those families are going through, but for some reason, the administration and the mouthpieces for the administration, they keep wanting to divert this somehow away from what actually happened and make it an issue about discrimination against transgenders. I mean, it was just like a short time after, like days after, maybe 36 hours after this whole ordeal, Joe Biden had his big celebration for National Transgender Day. So you see, the whole manifesto thing may not work so perfectly with the political and cultural agenda that the left is trying to promote right now. So then you say, well, we know how deep this state is, or we know who's in control. Is this another effort to actually suppress the truth? It's getting kind of twisted, guys, when you want us to believe that Hunter Biden's laptop, absolute Russian propaganda, disinformation, and yet you also want us to believe that Trump dossier thing from Russia, it turns out it's just the opposite. So what are we supposed to believe? We wonder why Americans don't trust their government anymore. So when you think about the poll numbers and Trump doing so well, it's quite possible that if he were to run, they would once again use whatever mechanisms they had in place to make sure that the media could not properly report on various stories, important stories that might have an effect on the election. But they keep pushing like this, and I'll tell you, people will keep pushing back. You're seeing it right now. Shares of Bud Light, they have just been hammered ever since they came out with the whole Dylan Mulvaney beer cans. Shares are trading down again today, while shares of competitor Molson Coors are trading up. Gee, I wonder how that happens. You know, sometimes when you completely alienate a customer base, it might have an effect on sales. Just saying. Don't take my word for it. Let's look at the numbers, okay? Year to date through April 1st, Bud Light's dollar sales were down 0.4%, down 0.4%. May not seem like much when you consider what the competitor's doing. You might get a little worried. Coors Light dollar sales, they are up 1.8%. So Coors Light's going up. So sales for Coors Light, they go up. Sales for Bud Light, they go down. And that is exactly what's being reflected in the stock price right now. Let's take a look at the stock. If you go back to when this whole thing really started taking off around March 31st, April 1st, that's when these commercials came out and people started picking up on it. Well, you look at the stock price and it has clearly suffered over there at Bud. In comparison, take a look at what Coors Light's been doing. Molson Coors shares, that's the ticker symbol TAP, they've been rallying. So this tells you investors, they know what's going on because they know consumers. They know consumers better than the company itself. It's an interesting lesson, I think, for businesses in general. You know, the expression go woke, go broke. There may be something to that. And it could be a problem now for a very, very big YouTuber. A lot of people are like, wait, who is this guy? Who are you talking about, Trish? Like, please, like, why do we even care? I'm going to tell you why you care. But before I get to why you should care, just know that this guy is like the bomb. He is a super duper big deal on YouTube, probably has the most YouTube subscribers in the world. And not only that, he has created a $500 million business. I'm talking about Mr. Beast. And all the kids watch him. All the kids love him. All the kids want to be him.
When you're 18, you're out the door.
Mr. Beast has turned this into a massive empire. Basically, he goes around and he's got his friends, his bros, and they like hang out and they do some charitable things and they go look at really cool luxury items. He just had a post the other day about if you were to spend $1 or $100,000 on a plane ticket, what would the difference be? Well, the thing like just exploded. I mean, this guy gets tons and tons and tons of views, but there's a shtick going on, right? Like it's a show. Let's not kid anyone here. It's a show and there's a cast. It's led by Mr. Beast. Jimmy Donaldson is actually his real name. And he's got all his guy friends around him. A lot of them have been around him his whole life. Like they've kind of grown up together. One of those guys, he's like his best guy, his best friend. So this is Chris Tyson. And this was him just like a year ago. This is Chris Tyson now. Okay. So like whatever. You're like, okay, who cares? Let him do what he wants to do. But I'm just going to tell you, like, this is sort of a big deal in that you have a whole show built around the premise of these guys. Well, how does the show now incorporate a girl? Fair question, right? You know, it's kind of a sad story because the guy has a wife, he's got a little kid. It's just, it's horrible and sad to see. And I'm sure he's going through a lot. Let's just talk about it from a business perspective. I am a business reporter, as you know. So from a business perspective, you get this $500 million empire. It's built on this sort of guy's guy environment and a wholesome one at that. Like it's a pretty wholesome show and a lot of kids watch it because it is. And he's made a sort of point of not being overly political, not getting into some of the grainier stuff. And he's been successful with that and brands love him. Well, you know that brands are not going to love him if he comes out against his friend. And also, look, it's his friend. Maybe he doesn't want to. Mr. Beast went on Twitter and he responded to somebody who was posting a comment about a video from a guy named Sunny V2, who's another YouTuber. So Sunny V2 was like exposing all this. And Mr. Beast said, "This is getting absurd. Chris isn't my nightmare. He's my friend. and things are fine. All this transphobia is starting to, and yeah, I'm sure he's getting really angry about the whole thing. I understand that. I appreciate it. And you're like, okay, can't people just have their own private life? But here's the thing. What do you do about the show? Like, the kids are noticing. They're like, wait a second. Chris used to have short hair. Now he has long hair. So I know. You're like, who the heck cares? Like, why does it really matter? Well, one, it does matter for the business because I'm not sure if he will get the same audience. I mean, maybe he'll get more sponsors. Hey, Bud Light. New sponsorship opportunity. You got to think about it from the business perspective. And again, why do we care? It's private business. Well, I think that a lot of parents might care. And the reason I say that is because you look at what's going on in Florida, you look at what Ron DeSantis has run into, but parents overwhelmingly have supported him in his efforts to not introduce the whole transgender thing at such an early age to kids. It's one of the reasons why these drag show story hours are making parents so upset. This is very polarizing. And I say this regardless of how you feel about any of it, okay? You gotta admit it's polarizing stuff. And so the question is, do you want to introduce that kind of polarized material into your show while simultaneously maybe getting all these parents upset and they legitimately have concerns? I mean, their concerns are we introducing our children to something at too young an age? I would argue that we are. I would argue that, you know what, this is too much for kids to handle. You're confusing them enough. I mean, black is now white, day is now night, male is now female, female is now male. I mean, come on, like life is hard enough for little kids and they're trying to get their bearings and you're introducing stuff and concepts at an age that I firmly believe too young for them to handle. So maybe he sees it as a business opportunity because sure, he'll lose some viewers, but there's plenty of other companies that'll come along for some big sponsorship deals because he's rah-rah woke. Mr. Beast goes woke. I can see the dollars lining up now. I say this all with tremendous respect for the guy. Like, he has built one heck of a business and he has incredible videos, really, really incredible videos. And I also just want to say, I love what he does, all the charitable work. It is impressive and he's enormously generous. I mean, there's sponsorship, etc. behind it all, but he really has a good image. Overall, just a great, great image. I just think there's some questions we got to look at right now. It's fair game in this kind of environment. Okay, so here's a doozy for you. Yesterday, you remember I told you about this?
What is the range that you would propose to pay?
My objective, and the objective that Kirsten and I describe in our book, is to eliminate the racial wealth gap in the United States. And this would require an expenditure of $14 trillion, which would be distributed evenly across the 40 million Black American descendants of U.S. slavery.
That's the Duke economics professor who thinks that he can solve racial inequality in America by just giving every Black descendant, or maybe you wouldn't be Black, every descendant of a slave in America. Actually, that is a good question. I'm going to think out loud for a minute, because what if you are a descendant, but you are so removed from that your skin is perfectly white? Would you still qualify for his handout? He wants to give out $350,000 to any descendant of slaves in America.
Pay me my money.
I mean, that's kind of an interesting question, because all of a sudden you're going to have people rushing to go do those DNA tests. Hey, sign me up. I get $350,000 from the federal government.
You smell that? What is that?
What?
What's that smell?
Opportunity.
No, money.
Oh, okay.
I know it doesn't solve anything, but they're pie in the sky ideas about wealth transfers. Well, they just can't get enough of them. That's one idea. I'll tell you what's scary is that some of this stuff is getting implemented. We just learned that the Federal Housing Finance Authority has put in a few little changes starting May 1st. If you want to buy a home and you happen to have good credit because you worked maybe pretty hard to have that good credit, paying your bills on time, that kind of thing, not taking out too many loans, not going crazy with the credit cards. If you did that, well, you probably did it because you think that, well, one day I'll be rewarded for that. It's the right thing to do, of course, but I'll also eventually be rewarded because I'll get lower interest rates, less fees, a better mortgage rate. Aha! Think again. Joe Biden comes into town. He suddenly changes it so that now, if you happen to have a good credit score, you're going to get charged more. Here are the numbers. Listen up. If you've got a credit score of 680 or more beginning on May 1st, the Biden administration now has a new rule. You're going to get charged about $40 more per month on your home loan above $400,000. Because you see, you got to subsidize the people who don't have a good credit score. Your money is going to go to help afford all the people that don't pay their bills on time to help them buy a house. Oh, like that makes sense, right? And it gets worse. You see, if you've saved up enough money and you want to put 15 or 20% down for your home mortgage, the government's going to slap you with more fees because now you are going to have to pay a higher rate to subsidize those with riskier credit scores. You know, we tried this leading up to 2008. I do believe it became the biggest financial crisis since the Great Depression. Remember Barney Frank? Barney Frank, the very loud and proud congressman from Massachusetts, big-time Democrat, quasi-socialist that believed you just needed to give everybody money so that they could buy their own house. They were called Nina loans. No income, no asset. You didn't have to have any money coming in the door. You didn't have to have any assets on hand. You didn't really have to have anything, but you could go get yourself a $500,000 house. We know how that all ended, do we not? You can't give out free money. You can't just say, we're going to give you this and hope for the best. And you certainly shouldn't be penalizing those that work hard to save their money, pay their bills on time, and say, we are going to now charge you more because we're a little worried about this guy over here. That is not America. It's not. I mean, that is like Venezuela-style socialism. Venezuela, which I happen to know a whole lot about, 20 some odd years ago, was like an amazing economy. It was actually the most prosperous economy in all of Latin America. I, at the time, had a job at Goldman Sachs. We were trading Latin American emerging market debt. Venezuela was one of the countries we covered. Well, who comes into town but Hugo Chavez? He wins the election. We're like, maybe he won't be that bad. We'll see. Oh, yeah, he was all that bad. Before you knew it, he put all his friends on the Supreme Court. He totally changed everything around. He was taking from those that had, giving to those who did not have, but he never had any kind of real system to back any of this up. In other words, there's no better education, there was no better infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He was just, robbing Peter to pay Paul. And as a result, Venezuela is one of the worst off economies in all of Latin America today. It only took 20 years. This move from Biden to charge people who pay their bills on time more to cover those who don't, that is Venezuela-style policy. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what we are in jeopardy of coming right now. All that said, you still got to pay your bills on time. And here to help us think through the insanity in these markets, the volatility that we're watching, help us think about how we save, how we plan, how we really allocate our funds for our future. I am so thrilled to welcome Rachel Cruz. I sat down with Rachel Cruz, who, by the way, just happens to be the daughter of Dave Ramsey, so she grew up around this stuff. I sat down with her a short time ago, and we talked about how you can put yourself on the right financial path. It's important to do, regardless of what Biden's up to. Rachel Cruz, she's host of the Rachel Cruz Show, Smart Money Happy Hour. That's a fun one. Rachel Cruz, welcome. Good to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me on.
And I know you got a book right there behind you. Know Yourself, Know Your Money. This has been sort of your crusade, and your father, Dave Ramsey, as well, helping people understand what to do with their money. Look, it's crazy right now. Nobody's really certain what's going to happen. You got the market up one day, down the next. I tend to be pretty bearish in this environment, full disclosure myself. But what are you telling people? What's your sense of where we're heading?
I think one of the best things people can do is just to get a simple, solid financial foundation under them to kind of weather the storm of life, because it has been up and down really since 2020. And then you can go to the Great Recession, right? You can go back to 2008, 9, 10 as well. So life is going to be up and down. So what you can control is the income that's coming into your account and what you do with it. And so one of the best things you can do is get out of debt, have a savings of 3 to 6 months of expenses. You can put that in a money market account or a high yield savings account. Be investing 15% of your income into retirement after that. So it's kind of these more simple steps. But what I always caution people or encourage people, I should say, is to control what you can control. You can't control what the Fed's going to do. You can't control what Washington's going to do. You can't control all of that. But what are the things that you can control? So put yourself in a good financial position so that when things do come up, because they will, that you can weather the storm.
So you've got some basic principles. How does that work in terms of, people's tolerance for risk, or if you're in a certain age category? You and I probably have longer for retirement. You probably have a longer time until you retire than me. But if you have that kind of time horizon versus if you don't, do you tell people to break it down that way if they're putting a certain amount into the equity, into the stock market each month?
I mean, honestly, a lot of our advice is still pretty consistent. I mean, even when you look at your 401k or even Roth IRAs, looking at 4 groups of mutual funds, because I'm not a big risk taker when it comes to especially retirement and investing. I'm not big in cryptocurrency. I'm not big in single stocks. So even just mutual funds, which sounds so boring for a lot of people because it's not flashy, it's not exciting. But honestly, it's the tortoise and the hare, in my opinion. And the tortoise wins every single time. And so it's this steady approach to wealth building, but also it has a long track record. The way that we teach people to build wealth, again, it's not sexy and flashy and exciting, but it is consistent. And so whether the market goes up and down, it is a long-term play when you go to invest. And so that's the way I look at it. But again, if you have big purchases you're going to be making, here in the next few years, then that's where I'm like, okay, yeah, I have something that's a little bit safer. High yield savings account right now, I mean, it's 3-4%, which is amazing. So you can take advantage of some of that if you want, but
Hey,
especially when
listen.
it comes to it.
Yeah, I mean the 6-month treasury. I mean, it really, again, I think had we not had the whole SVB thing, it might have continued moving higher. I think it's, people are trying to settle this whole thing out right now, but you're right. There are places that you can be that are pretty safe. I'm with you, Rachel. Like, I really am. I say this all the time. Like, I don't care. I don't need to make 60% in my portfolio. I just want to know that my money's safe, that I'm not going to lose anything, that I'm outpacing inflation.
Yes,
So that's an issue, right? Like, how do you outpace inflation? Because even if you can get 4%, 5% on something that might be really locked in, like on a treasury, if you've got inflation in the 6% range, how do you manage that?
Yeah, well, for your long-term investing, then I would not use the high yield savings account, right? Those are for short-term purchases if you're going to make. But when you look at the market, I think 11.8% is average over the course since it's been there. So I think that there's just something to be said about having a long track record, putting your money in. And for me, it's consistent investing. Even when the market's down, be consistent with your investing. And Warren Buffett has a quote, which I love. He said, be fearful when others are greedy and be greedy when others are fearful. And greedy is kind of, I don't care for that word, but the idea is like, hey, if people are jumping on the bandwagon of this new thing that's so exciting and so great, I would be cautious. I would. I naturally step back. I'm like, let's see how this all plays out. Cryptocurrency is one example. I mean, there's a lot of examples that you're like, where, again, when people are fearful, like in the market, I mean, I was talking to people that wanted to cash out their 401ks. They wanted to pull completely out of the market because it went down. And it was like, no, you stay in. And in my opinion, it's that consistent investing. When they're fearful, you put money in and your money's going to get you more, obviously, in a down market. So again, it's a long-term play, but fear is a real thing. It is a real thing. And it's a terrible financial advisor. Do not make decisions based on fear.
No, for sure. I mean, emotion plays so much into it. And then you look at the headlines and look, I've worked at the 3 big financial networks from CNBC to Bloomberg to Fox Business. And the reality is, look, when you're in a news cycle, you're on the news, and the network is going to be on the news. And so on a down day, all you do is you put your biggest bears on TV, right? And everybody's freaking out.
Yeah.
And then when the market's up, you get all your bulls. And so you kind of go in those waves. And I say the important thing as an investor is you kind of need to be able to see through that. And what I actually do say to people is, try not to watch that. Really? I mean, look, I actually would say don't consume that in that sense, because you will get so fearful. It plays upon your fears, and then you kind of can't see the forest for the trees, right? Because what you're talking about is almost putting it on sort of like automatic pilot. I'm going to save, and this is what I'm going to do.
Yep, you're exactly right. I'm like, you'd have to live in a padded room if you were watching Fox and CNN both all the time. I mean, like, it would drive you crazy. And now we have social media. So your, mother-in-law is putting her economic advice out on Facebook to all her friends. And you're thinking, oh no, so you really want to be careful with what you consume, because it's a lot of fear. And I'll be honest, the world is really hard. I mean, if it's job reports or the housing market or the markets, I mean, there's a lot out there. And again, if that's where you sit and live, you're not going to make great long-term financial decisions.
But I think you said something at the beginning, which is really important and cannot be stressed enough, especially given what we went through with COVID. And you talked about having money set aside, that emergency fund, the liquidity that you need before you start getting into everything else.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Because what's hard is if something happens, and it may not be a pandemic, but it could be a job loss. Mm-hmm. It could be an unexpected move that you need to make. I mean, there things happen. And the truth is, things are going to happen. So my big play is if you have no debt, if you don't owe anyone anything, if your car payment and your student loan and that personal loan and credit card debt, if you don't owe anyone anything and you have 3 to 6 months of expenses saved in the bank, your life is just different. You sleep different at nights. Your anxiety is lower because you actually have a clear head because you think, okay, well, if something happens, it's not good. I don't want bad things to happen. But when they do, not if, but when they do, we have the ability to weather that storm. And I think a lot of Americans are not in that position. That's really scary and really sad, honestly, because I've walked through it. A lot of people's stories, even since 2020, when things have happened and shifted, and it absolutely is, it's disastrous. So really get that foundation under you.
Well, it's so important for people's psychology. And there's another component to that, Rachel, too, which I think is hard for some Americans because, we like to live flashy lifestyles and, everybody's flexing on Instagram.
This guy's so rich, he has a swimming pool in his swimming pool.
Living within your means so that you can have that good night's sleep.
That's right.
How important is that for people to focus on?
It's huge. It's really interesting. I've been doing some research of just that about the mental wellness of someone and their financial wellness and how tied together they are, because you just make different decisions in life when your stress level isn't up and your anxiety level isn't up. When you have a level of control over your money and over your life, you have autonomy and you're able to make different decisions. And it does something, it gives you power back versus, again, working for the bank or working for Toyota Motor Company, right? And so there's something about that really is powerful. And that's what I encourage people. I'm like, the margin in your budget, it's worth having $725, which is the average car payment right now, in your budget and in the bank just to be there, versus having no money month to month. And if you lose a job, you don't know how you're going to pay your bills. So the new car isn't worth it in my opinion. Getting that night's sleep and having
you're
margin.
Absolutely right. And it's almost like sort of finding almost a religion, right? With yourself and a comfort level with yourself so that you're taking control. And
exactly right.
Ultimately, it really does pay off. This is something, though, that Rachel doesn't get really taught in school.
I'll never understand the workings of high finance.
Frankly, we spent a lot of time on a lot of things in school, especially these days, but understanding, say, how to get a mortgage, interest rates, credit cards, why you never want to actually be putting anything right on a credit card because you're going to be paying 18, 22%,
right,
in extra charges. And I don't know, as kids today, and frankly, the adult population even fully understands this because we're not, for whatever reason, servicing that in school. We don't, home economics, you get to bake some dynamite chocolate chip cookies, but you're not actually learning home economics.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And even how to create a zero-based budget for the month. Like that's not being taught. So we are seeing some states that are actually mandating financial literacy as a credit for high school. I think Michigan is one of those states. I think Florida is. So there's a few states that are doing that, which is fantastic. And at Ramsey Solutions, we actually have a high school curriculum, and we graduated our 6 millionth student last year that has gone through the curriculum. But it's a huge part of my story because growing up in a home where money was talked about, I was given that gift of financial literacy from an early age. And my parents weren't all nerdy. We didn't have like mutual fund birthday parties growing up. Like it wasn't crazy. But it was enough where it was like, okay, I understand the dangers of things around money and I understand what I should be proactive in. And
what did your dad used to tell you? I mean, what were some of his big lessons?
Well, when we were really little, for instance, like we were never given an allowance. We were always on commission. So you work, you get paid. You don't work, you don't get paid. So understanding that money comes from work, doesn't just come from mom and dad. That was a big lesson very early on. And then honestly, it was really simple. I mean, especially as kids, we had 3 jars. Each of us kids did it. It was give, save, and spend. And when you earned your money for the week, you had to put some in give, you had to put some in save, and some in spend. And it was like you just had to build all 3 of those money muscles, if you will. And then as we got older, as teenagers, we had our own checking account. We had to learn to reconcile a checking account and all of it. So, I mean, rather basic things.
But still new for some people. I mean, really, Rachel, a lot of people don't do it.
Yep. Yeah, you're exactly right. So I would just encourage parents watching, like you are responsible for this part of your child, of your child learning this in order for them to launch into the real world. And you don't have to be perfect with money. Your example is big, more is caught than taught. But some parents feel like they're out of the game because they're struggling with money. They're like, well, Rachel, I am the one living paycheck to paycheck. I am the one that can't cover a $400 emergency. Like, who am I? But
Well,
I'm like,
I mean,
you are
look,
their parents.
it's been a passion for your whole family, certainly for your father, for you. You have 2 shows now, right? The Rachel Cruz Show and Smart Money Happy Hour. What's the difference between the two?
Yeah, so the Rachel Cruz Show, it's on YouTube and podcast, and it's a little bit more educational, I would say. It's still fun. I mean, I still like to bring, who I am to it. So that's once a week. And the Smart Money Happy Hours with another Ramsey personality, George Camel. So we sit down with a cocktail every week, and it's more about kind of what's going on in the world. Yeah, I know. It's what's going on in the world. So pop culture, current events, and money, and we have fun. It's more of a lighter, enjoyable podcast. I think it's an easier pill to swallow if you're not used to money podcasts, but it's been really fun.
It is such a pleasure to talk with you today, Rachel. Thank you so much for joining the program. I encourage people to check out the book, Know Yourself, Know Your Money. Watch her on the Rachel Cruz Show and Smart Money Happy Hour. Cheers to that.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on. I so appreciate it.
Okay, fluffy time, everyone. Well, Fluffy's on a great diet. Fluffy's on a great diet right now. I made sure of it. And I really credit Dr. Dennis Black, naturopathic doctor that I met who cares passionately about dogs' health. I credit him and I credit Rough Greens for making this all happen. Roughgreens.com/Trish. That is the handle that you need to go to if you want to get a free trial bag yourself. Anyway, he really took this on himself, looking at sort of his dogs and knowing how much he wanted them to be around for a long time, knowing how important their health is as well as ours, right? We think about ours and these poor little guys, they can't talk, although sometimes I think Fluffy can. Anyway, they can't talk. Yeah. So when they have a problem, we kind of get a little worried. I certainly do. And we want to do everything we can to ensure their health. Well, Rough Greens is part of that. You look at all this food on the store shelves and you open it up and often it smells just atrocious. You're like, wait a second. Like, what is it? It's dead food. Like, this is all dead food. Well, this stuff, this supplement makes it come alive. Help make sure that your dog is having food, eating food that really is alive with nutrients like amino acids, probiotics, proteins, minerals, vitamins, all those things that they need to have a long, healthy, happy life.
Practically perfect in every way.
Fluffy loves the stuff. He gobbles up his dinner every single night because of Rough Greens. Rough Greens has really been a game changer for him. Let it be a game changer for your dog. And you can do it all for free. Just go and get your free Jumpstart trial bag. Go to roughgreens.com/Trish. My name, roughgreens.com/Trish. Sign up for your free trial bag today and give it a shot. It'll be at your house in just a couple of days. You just pay for shipping. That's it. And let me know how your dog does on it. I can tell you from personal experience, they will love it. My dog likes food. He wasn't like crazy about food. Maybe it goes with being a little teeny tiny Maltese, but now he just cannot wait for dinner time. And it's because of vitamins.
Ah, sweet.
So do me a favor. If you've been watching, make sure you send a comment down below. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Please do that. Make sure you share the video. Do hit the bell. The bell is really, really important because then you know when we have a show, you know when I'm here. And given some of the things that go on these days, somebody was asking me why they haven't seen me more on Facebook. I'm like, good question, right? It's not always so easy to break through. And I suspect a lot of the things that I talk about, some people don't want talked about. It's exactly what we began the show with. When you consider you had all these super spies putting out a letter, signing this letter saying that the Hunter Biden laptop was nothing but Russian disinformation. The same crowd of people were telling us, oh yeah, that Trump dossier thing, that's real. And we learned it was exactly the opposite. You can understand. And so because of that, it's really important that you subscribe and that you hit the bell so that you know when I'm here. Make sure you subscribe to the full audio podcast on Apple. It would be great if you did that and do me the favor of maybe leaving a review and 5 stars if you would. It all helps. Every single bit helps.